How is
Oh, sorry.
how is
Okay, I'm here with my good friend, Mr. Daniel Miller. What's going on, brother? How you doing?
I have a full cup of coffee, so I'm doing excellent.
Doing excellent. I'm on my day off. It's funny that I always tell my wife that she's so popular, the entire nation celebrates her birthday because she's a Cinco de Mayo baby. So
Is oh really? Okay.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I tell
that's a
her
good one.
I always said, yeah, we're celebrating your birthday and we're not celebrating anything about Mexico.
Well, the one thing that the one small mercy she gets is there's no gift exchange, so you don't have to worry about like Christmas babies, right? Who have their
Yes.
birthday on Christmas and it's like, I just got ripped out of half of my gifts for the year. So
Yes, yes. I have one son who was born um just before Thanksgiving, and then I have another son that was born like the middle of January. So it's like, okay,
yeah.
how am I going to divide these gifts between November, December, and January? How's this going to work out?
Oh, I get it. I see you probably has the same problem because I was born around Thanksgiving as well. So every so often my birthday falls on Thanksgiving and I can remember as a kid it was like birthday, but there's also turkey, you
Mm.
see. So it's kind of one of those deals now where for my birthday, like literally my birthday wish every year is I want to sit on the couch, I want to watch TV, I want to eat a bucket of fried chicken, and I want to be left alone. So, there's that.
I understand completely. It would have killed me if
Yeah.
my birthday would have fallen on Thanksgiving because when I was a kid, all I ever wanted was cheesecake for my birthday, and I would have been really disappointed with pumpkin pie.
There you go. There you
Yeah.
go. See,
Yeah.
you and I, this is why we can be really good friends because we have the same dietary needs.
Uh, so I wanted to get you on talk about Texit. I haven't talked about Texit.
Sure.
Here's the thing. The first time I heard about Texit was actually after I had already written an article for the Libertarian Institute on Texas secession. So I wrote that article,
Right.
I think, in 2019, and then I think I discovered y'all in 2020. I want to say it might have been 2019,
Okay.
a little bit later than I wrote that articles because I had met Buck before I'd heard of y'all, and I met Buck right when I wrote that article.
Got it.
So
Got it. Well, I'll
time
tell you,
wise, I think we were
the,
all on the same thought process. Sorry about that.
maybe look, I've literally been at this since 1996.
Mm,
And I mean that's a long story that's about to get told. I'm dropping two new books this year. One about the Supreme Court case of Texas versus White, but one about the 30 plus year history of this movement. The story has never been told. But it's you were probably part of that sort of pre-COVID, right around the time of COVID wave, right? Because our trajectory of growth since we founded the organization in 2005 has been of steady growth, right? I mean, but we do get these surges, and that
mm.
was one of them. So that was probably that wouldn't surprise me if that's when you found us.
Well, your wife's here. Do I need to admit her?
Mm-mm.
Oh, okay. Yeah, she's in the waiting room.
No, there's
Yeah.
just checking.
She just wanted to make sure we were good.
Yeah,
Okay.
she handled the scheduling. She wanted to
She
make sure I
did.
was where I'm supposed to be.
Right. Yeah. Well, and I
Yeah,
was like, she texted me and was like, I'm here to schedule for Daniel. And I'm like, well, let's talk about your ankle. Let's not talk about
yeah, I
the.
know, right? She's graduated from her scooter phase to her what she refers to her Herman Munster phase with the boot.
Yes.
So
Yeah. So
yeah,
we
yeah.
we were in the hall the other day and she was dancing when George was playing music. And I said, "Hey, you can't be dancing." She goes, "As long as I only do it from the waist up, I'm good."
Oh, hey, let me tell you. So fun, and I don't know if we've talked about the story, but I spoke at the Abbeville Institute's conference, the annual conference they do. I guess it was what, March, I think it was.
Hmm.
And so we were literally packing up because we were going to drive. It was in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's not that far of a stretch, but
Right, right.
8 hours or something like that. But um, as you know, we were literally packing up, and she had gotten up before me. So I get awakened to her going, "Hey, we've got a problem." And she's like, and I'm groggy. I'm like, what's the problem? She says, I don't know if I've sprained or broken my ankle. Probably sprained, nothing's displaced, but I can't walk on it. And I'm so, I'm scrambling. I'm trying to figure out, okay, look, we're supposed to leave out. Look, I'll cancel. We'll do whatever. She goes, no, we're not doing that. I said, well, I can't. You can't go to this thing. She's like, well, I'm absolutely going. She's like, look, if I went to the doctor, they would tell me rest, ice, compression, and elevation because nothing's displaced. She said, so what's the difference in me doing that here by myself or doing it in the back of the car for the next 9 hours on the way to Montgomery? And she insisted that we go. And she stayed the whole, so we literally we had a scooter delivered from like Walmart or somewhere, one of those that those knee scooters. And when we got there, we door dashed from Walgreens and ankle and dude, she was a trooper. I mean, you
Mm.
want to talk about hardcore, man. She rode that entire conference out. We get back Monday, X-ray, boom, sure enough, it's broken. So um she's that doesn't surprise me that she was up and trying to dance on it.
Yeah. Well, and I told her on Posca, I was like, like I'm standing there and my feet are hurting, my knees are hurting, my back's hurting, and I'm looking at you and I'm like, as long as she can stand up, I'm gonna stand up. Like I don't
There you
care.
go. Yeah, she's in there raising the bar, man. I'm like,
Yes, she is.
okay, all right. Well, anyway, that's for those that are watching that don't know the backstory of what just happened. There you go.
Anyway, so it didn't surprise me. Well, I guess the name surprised me. Y'all started in 2005 with the name Texit because it wasn't until after Brexit that the adding on of exit behind, initials like came
Yeah.
to mind for anybody, I don't think, for most people at least. But it didn't surprise me that there was a movement of Texas secession in like that was very
Hmm.
strongly related because I wasn't born in Texas, but I lived most of my life here. And all my cradle Texas friends are just like, we're the only state that can secede. We need to break away from these people. They're a bunch of
Yeah.
tyrants. We don't belong in the same
Yeah.
nation. We're our own country. And so that's not a very abnormal like mindset. So what was it like getting Texas started early on? Because I'm sure there were supporters, but I'm sure that there were a lot of people that had like implants, I guess, that were kind of like, nah, we're part of the same nation.
It's really interesting because there's from 1996 to when we founded the organization in 2005. There was a stretch there that I like to refer to as the wilderness years. Right,
Mm,
there was a definite. Um, I'm not going to say drive, but a desire, a need, a want. But there was this mindset that can we actually do it? It's too difficult. It's, that sort of thing. So the desire was there, but the belief that it could be executed was just, it just people had that. That was the primary hurdle. And I tell people all the time that the first opposition that we had to overcome was a lack of self-belief among Texans, right? That it
mm,
could be accomplished. Now, granted, there will always be and has always been a percentage of Texans that just don't care how it gets done, what the obstacles are. These guys are ready to charge the gates of hell with a squirt pistol, right? That passion exists and will always continue to exist. But one of the things that we knew going into late 2002, early 2003, there's a handful of us, was that there was this explosion of self-determination movements around the world. The stat that I just absolutely love that kind of blew me out of the box back in 96 was, at that time in 1996, you go back and you look at the founding of the United Nations. There were roughly 54 fully sovereign, recognized nation states on the planet. And by the time 1996 rolled around, there were 192, right? So those places, those nation states didn't fall from space. The Earth didn't get any bigger, right? They were people like us who just
Hmm.
firmly believed that they happened to be the best people to govern themselves. Excuse me. And so, you know, so we knew that there was a roadmap, right? We knew that there were at least templates out there, at least 140 plus of them, going into this 2 year period. So, preceding 2005, we did this in-depth 2 year study where we looked at historically successful independence movements in the 20th century. We looked at ones that were still active, in other words, ones that were still working. That's where you have your nexus with Scotland and the Scottish National Party, or at that time UKIP, the UK Independence Party, that were really pushing for Brexit. Catalonia, some of those guys, and then we also looked at ones that did not succeed, right? Ones that just were abject failures. And from that, we were able to distill out what I would consider a series of guiding principles for independence movements. And then, you take those and then you have to overlay them with the electoral and political reality wherever you live. And that's why I will say, when you're looking at these independence movements, it's kind of like Mark Twain said about history. He says, history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes,
Mm.
right? There are no two independence movements that are exactly the same because they're all shaped by really three major factors: political factors, economic factors, and cultural factors. So we had to take what we learned about all of those things and we had to overlay it or run it through the filter of the political, cultural, and economic reality on the ground here in Texas. And so that led in November 2005 to the formation of the organization, which is called the Texas Nationalist Movement. At the time that we started the organization, there had been some polling, but it had not been very recent nor very extensive. And I have my own bone to pick about political polling. Um, but we were in the support for it was in the upper single digits based on whatever polling we could get our hands on, which was really poor. It was pretty pathetic. The good news is that we've always polled our the support for independence has always polled higher than the approval rating of the United States Congress, which is kind of a low watermark, right? Where those guys poll somewhere right above or below leprosy on any given day. So the bottom line for us is that when we launched in 2005, it was what I would consider probably the um, most sincere and effective attempt at a real political, cultural, and economic movement to make Texas a self-governing and independent nation.
When you get into the TEXIT and you're bringing this up to people, one of the things that I hear whenever I'll mention it to somebody, they'll be like, "I like
Yeah.
the idea, but it's never going to happen." And so this goes
You know,
back to
that's
the
the epitaph for every failed political. That's the look. Not to interrupt, but that's the epitaph for every failed political prophet that has ever existed. It will never happen,
right.
right? That's the swan song for for these guys. Don't So don't you can't ever listen to that thing. That's what they always say, right up until the time that it does happen.
That it does happen. Well, what I was going to ask you is do you have you noticed, because you said that there, like in the beginning there were obviously going to be those types of grumblings behind the scenes, but have you noticed that being less, and when was the time frame where you feel like it shifted? Because I could point to when Obama was president, and wasn't
Yeah.
it Governor Perry who's like, we'll
Yeah.
secede. Like, we don't need you, And I didn't hear one person in Texas like fire back at him. It seemed like everybody got extremely excited instantly. And it seems like that could have been like a very, very big shift in the mindset of Texans and joining the movement. Did you notice that?
Yeah, it was interesting because we were there. Our organization was there when that whole thing shook down. He was essentially speaking at a Tea Party rally. But prior to that, there had been an introduction of some bills. There was HCR 50, which was basically a fist shaking resolution. Back when Brandon Creighton was in the House, he was a rep, then he became a senator. Now he's the chancellor of Texas Tech. He filed a bill, and we went to go testify. But they had held a press conference on the steps of the south steps of the Capitol, and our people were there. And what was weird was this change, right? So you go from 2005 to, that was what, 2009,
Something like that.
2010, somewhere in
Yeah.
that ballpark. And our guys showing up to the Capitol in their independent shirts were being treated like rock stars by the legislators, and that was a weird thing for us, right?
Mm.
So, but you go back, Tommy, to what I was saying earlier. There's always that desire, right? That simmering under the surface. It's been that way since Texas joined the Union.
Right.
Texas almost like within a year of when Texas joined the Union, we almost went to war with the United States. It's a
Right.
story that doesn't get told nearly enough. But the but you have Perry speaking at this Tea Party rally, and our people out there are in the audience and the crowd, and they start screaming at a quiet part, secede, and the crowd goes nuts. And so Perry walks off stage, and of course, because of the crowd's reaction, the media starts pressing him on the issue. And instead of flatly saying, I'm against it, that's not the kind of talk we need, he toys with them. And he says, hey, you never know what could happen. When we joined the union, it was that we were going to be sovereign. And, if the federal government keeps thumbing its nose at the states, who knows what might happen. So he played it off that way, and the media went nuts. So you had, I think it was Daily Costs or one of those, did a poll, and I've got I mean, it's been a while. So, um, but Daily Costs did a poll. They commissioned a poll, and the question that they asked was, do you believe that Texas would be better off as an independent nation? And the top line that they published on it was that 35% of Texans said yes. But when you dug into the numbers, like we did, because that's
Hmm.
one of the things you have to do if you're going to have a real deal organization. When you dig into the numbers and look at the crosstabs, what was really startling about that number was that you were slightly under a majority of Republican voters said that. I think it was like 48%. Um, and immediately we knew from that number, number one, political polling is broken because of how they reported the top line, the actual methodology, but that nearly half of Republicans that were surveyed said, yeah, I think we'd be better off as an independent nation. Well, then all of a sudden your strategy changes, right? Now you're going from trying to convince people to just trying to find the people that are already convinced, and the only thing you're having to convince them of is to act in their own self-interest. Well, if we would be better off as an independent nation, then why in the world would you settle for less than that?
Right.
So, that stretches on. You get to 2014, right around the time of the Scottish independence referendum. And, the pollsters, anytime independence pops up anywhere, they love to come here and talk to Texans. Maybe not so much anymore because of where the poll numbers are. But 2014, there was a Reuters Ipsos poll asking Texans the question, poorly, but asking the question nonetheless. And again, the top lines were like 35% of people that live in the Southwest want to withdraw from the Union. That's literally the headline that Reuters led with. But we got a hold of the crosstabs, right? Again, we got a hold of the data.
Hmm.
So we go pull the data down and we look. And what are the breakdowns here in Texas? 54% support among Republican voters. You've got 46, 47%, somewhere in that ballpark of independent voters, and over a third of Democrat voters. And we're like, wait a minute. Now the work that we're doing, because we're out there, during this whole time, we're doing what an organization does, right? We're engaging with voters. We're doing public education campaigns. We're interacting with legislators. We're pushing, we're promoting, we're showing up in the media. And so 2014 comes along and we're like, hey, now we're a majority of the dominant political party in the state of Texas. Let's push that. So then you get to, right around the time of the where actually the exit portmanteau shows up is Grexit,
Right.
when Greece wanted to exit the euro, for the currency and go back to the
Hmm.
drachma. And all of a sudden we're like, hey, we have an X in our name. This makes sense. So that's when, right around that time is when we started using the term Texit a lot.
Okay.
You fast forward to when you came in, and I'll tell you where we were at that point. We had a massive convention fight at the 2016 Republican convention to put this as a plank on the platform. If 2019 is around the time you came in, there would have been a Republican state convention in 2020 of that year, and of course it was COVID, so they had to do the convention virtually. But because of all the work that we had done in the lead up to that, and the fact that the poll numbers that were surfacing at that point were even better in our favor, a plank got added to the Republican Party platform, essentially reaffirming the right of Texas to withdraw from the Union.
Hmm.
So now you've got our position being echoed by the dominant political party in the state of Texas. You've got polling that's coming out that's ever more in our favor, particularly when they ask the question the correct way. And it's been nothing but blue sky and upward trajectory since then.
Mm. It seems to me like that the things that would hold the movement back the most really are our national politicians like Cornyn and Cruz, who really like their positions of power in the federal government and the access to money and influence they have. How involved do they get in lobbying the state government to avoid these conversations?
You have to almost look at the whole thing as a machine, right? So it would be easy if we just kind of shuffle this off and say the guys at the federal level are the problem. That's not the case at all, right?
Mm,
I mean, we literally now have our first Texas First Pledge signer going to Congress in the next session, right? He's one of our guys. He's the Steve Toth who beat Dan Crenshaw
mm,
is a Texas First Pledge signer. Um, and you've had Ted Cruz make remarks when voluntarily, not even being forced to, where he essentially said he's not there yet. Okay. So it's not sort of this monolithic line where we say the federals are the biggest obstacle. Probably the biggest obstacle that we have is how that machine relates to what happens here in Texas politics. Little known story is that I guess it was right after maybe it was the 2015 session. It's either the 23rd, may have been the 2013 session. Anyway, um, we had a meeting with Lieutenant Governor David Dewhurst, who you would probably at the time, everybody would think he is the establishment of the establishment. And had a meeting with him on the opening day of the session, a meeting that he requested, knowing that we were there having an event. And he had just come off of the floor from administering the oath of office to the senators. And so we sat down in his office, and I quoted in part of the conversation, talking to him about what we wanted to do, which was we wanted to pass legislation that would give Texans a vote on this issue. And the rationale for that was Article 1, Section 2 of the Texas Constitution. So I quoted it to him. And he opens up he gets up, he goes behind his desk, he grabs a copy of the Texas Constitution, he cracks it open, and he says, "Say that again." And so he starts reading along with me, like putting his finger on the line and reading along. I'm like, wait a minute. This guy just got off of the floor of the Senate administering an oath of office to senators who swore an oath to uphold this very Constitution, and he is shocked by literally what it says in Article 1, which is the Texas Bill of Rights.
Right.
Well, that conversation carried out to where he's like, "Look, I would love to help get this through." He says, "But I cannot and will not do it without a sign off from the Attorney General, because it'll ultimately be the Attorney General that's got to fight this out." So if you go look to see who the Attorney General was at the time, it was now Governor Greg Abbott. So Dewhurst is ready to go, chomping at the bit to do this. He goes to Abbott, and Abbott's office refuses to play ball. They say, "We don't want to touch it," because Abbott was getting ready to run for governor and was concerned about how it would affect his chances of getting elected. He didn't want his campaign to be about that thing.
Mm.
First example, from us that we saw direct contact with Greg Abbott's desire to just basically climb the political ladder and be devoid of principle. So, you know, I say that story, Tommy, to essentially illustrate that a lot of the opposition that we have here is a well entrenched political establishment that will stop at absolutely nothing to keep Texans from having a vote on this issue. If you take them at their word, right? Because you listen to what they say that nobody supports this, that it's absolutely fringe. It's, just something that it's just a bunch of loud people that are promoting this. If you listen to that argument and take it at face value, then that's all the more reason that they should support a vote on this issue. Because if it is as fringe as they say it is, you have a vote, it goes down in flames, you kill the issue for a generation. But they see the same poll numbers we do, which is why they fight so hard against it. We know that if this thing goes on a ballot tomorrow, it wins. And it doesn't win by a little, it wins by a lot.
And we've been close to having it actually on the ballot a couple of times. Am I correct about that?
Well, sort of, right? The ballot versus a ballot, right?
Yeah.
That's the distinction. So we ran several petition campaigns, right? Texas is not an initiative and referendum state. It's just not, right? We can't do like California or some of these other states, go collect signatures and put something on the ballot,
Mm.
except in one very narrow exception, and it's in Texas Election Code 172.088. And essentially, what it allows voters to do by petition is place the question on a party's primary ballot. It basically is a secondary way. Normally, the political party themselves, the executive committee of a political party that nominates by primary, will put their own ballot resolutions, but it provides a pathway for citizens to put a non-binding question on a party's primary ballot.
Mm.
So we've come quite close, right? The most recent one that we did was obviously, the one that got all the headlines a few years ago, where we collected the signatures, we followed the letter of the law, and it was rejected by the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas. He gamed the system quite well to deny the 100 and almost 40,000 people who signed that petition. He to deny them a voice, but ultimately, I think it played out for the good. But that being said, that's not the real referendum. That's not the
Right.
real ballot we need, right? That the all roads to this issue lead through the Texas legislature. And so, back several sessions ago, Kyle Biederman filed our legislation. Back when he was a state representative, it was HB 1359. It was the Texas Independence Referendum Act.
Yeah, I
And
remember that.
had it passed, yeah, and that you were probably around for that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
had it passed, Texans would have been able to go on a ballot during a constitutional amendment election, right? So it'd be a November, and answer the question: should the state of Texas reassert its status as an independent nation? And that's it. And man, so we've had actual TIRA filed twice, and we fully expect that it will be filed again this next session.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I was under the impression it was getting closer and closer to them being it being undeniable to get it on the ballot because like it just seems to be catching on with such momentum. And I'm not even
Yeah.
certain that it's only like the Republican Party in Texas that is actually in favor of this. There
No.
I would think that there would be quite a few like kind of like the blue dog Democrat types that would actually be in favor of this too, because of the way that the nation as a whole is moving, and they feel like they have like a little bit less say over their own political system here at home.
Yeah. I mean, look, the most recent decent polling that we have is from Survey USA, right? I mean, there's some more recent ones from Redfield Strategies and some of those guys, but their methodology is jacked. But Survey USA ranked A plus by 538 as accuracy, no partisan swing, no garbage. Survey USA did this with proper questions, and the breakdowns that they found, I think, are something that we already knew, which is this is not a partisan issue. It skews heavy on the Republican side, but as
Right.
we stand right now, we're well over a majority of Republican voters. We're well over a majority of independent voters, and right at a majority of Democratic voters. Right. So
Mm,
the Survey USA top line was that 60% are in
right.
favor. Right. So when asked the question properly, 60% are in favor. So that's where we're at. That's why the TNM has become outside of the Republican Party of Texas or the Democratic Party of Texas. This is why we're the single largest political advocacy organization in the state right now. Excuse me.
Now, moving forward, is there any thoughts of possibly creating a separate political party altogether if the mainstream political parties refuse to cooperate?
It's an interesting question that we get. I would say fairly often, either because of frustration with the existing political parties or because they've seen, like when the Brexit Party had their big electoral success
Mm,
in the European Parliament elections before Brexit was finished. Um, here's the reality of it. You go back to when I talked about that 2 year ahead of the foundation of the TNM. One of the options that was on the table was starting a political party. In the same vein as the Scottish National Party or UKIP or
right.
any of those. And it was soundly rejected, and people think that that's an odd thing. But
Mm,
when you look structurally at how the political system, the electoral system is here, by through law, whether it's written statute or case law, the courts, whatever it is, the deck is stacked against the formation of a new political party. And I would say, especially so here in Texas, right? You can form one, but your electoral success your chances are so close to zero as they might as well be zero.
mm,
Those circumstances have not substantially changed. Now, one of the things that I think people they don't really understand is how intertwined the government law and the political parties, which people kind of view as um, independent organizations. I don't think people really understand how intertwined they are. Um, they're just by statute. If you go through the Texas election code, you find so many hurdles for the formation of new political parties. And I think it's intentional. It's to discourage the formation, to maintain a lock by the duopoly, the Republican Party and the Democratic Party, and to effectively make this a two-step electoral process where you have your primaries and just the two major parties get to participate in those, and that gets all the coverage, and the administration of those is entrenched in government. and then whoever passes along there. So it really, Tommy, is strategic. I don't know that the way the electorate currently is, the voters, plus the way that the law is stacked against the formation of additional parties, I don't know that there is as much opportunity for success, particularly on our issue, um, going that route. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I mean, I, when you, as you break that down, I remember a friend of mine who's an attorney up in the Dallas area, running for attorney general under the Libertarian Party, and he had a lot of the
Yeah.
same complaints. He was like, I couldn't get on the debate stage. That none of this, I I couldn't get my name on the ballot in certain areas,
Yeah.
and he had a lot of issues. So I can definitely see that as being a problem. I just saw it with maybe with the support of so many people with the 60% support ratio, you could just be like, look, we're going to throw every other political like ideal off the table and we're just talking about this. This is what our guys are running on, period. And that could really
Yeah.
create a coalition.
It could. One of the things you have to look at though, and this is getting really into the weeds. So I hope you don't mind, but I
I don't
really
mind.
love this wonkish stuff, right? Is you have to look at people that support an independence vote. So if it goes on the ballot, they would vote yes. That number does not separate cleanly from partisan identity,
Mm,
right? In the sense that you may have someone who is absolutely pro independence, but staunchly Republican or staunchly Democrat or staunchly independent that will not cross over. So you don't, it's not a one-to-one correlation where you have somebody who's going to support an independence vote would support a political party who that is their primary thing. Because the other part of being a political party is political parties can't be just single issue parties, right? You have to have some depth, some direction. And that's when, you go back historically and you look at when the wheels fell off the wagon with the last attempt to really kind of break out a political party, and that was the Reform Party. Remember when Perot and
yeah.
Buchanan and those guys, and they did that, and what you had was this idea of reform, which is a great idea, but is that enough to hold the coalition together to say, okay, great, now we are going to now there's going to be a third major party and we're going to be kingmakers and we're going to win elections. Is it enough? And as we saw there, I mean, the spin out was just incredible. So because you don't have, this absolute kind of separation on the independence issue, you put yourself in the same situation that Scottish National Party was in. When you look at why they lost the independence referendum, it's because the independence question became uh, so woven with the Scottish National Party and its manifesto. When Alex Salmond rolled out and his government rolled out the Scottish White Paper, which was done to essentially answer every question everybody had about what could happen after independence, they fell into the trap, which was the only answers they could give were answers that were in alignment with the Scottish National Party manifesto, right? They're essentially their platform. And so what they did was the referendum on independence became a referendum on S&P governance. And that's why when you look at the results from the Scottish independence referendum, the percentage is almost exactly the same as what the Scottish National Party vote share was in the previous general election. I
Mm,
mean, almost down to like within a point or two. That's how close they were. So you have to remember if you're going to keep the main thing, independence, if that is the main thing, then you work within that political system that you have to just make it a thing among those others. So a
right.
Democrat who supports independence is a Democrat who supports independence. We're going to have their vote regardless. The same thing with a Republican or with an independent. If we muddy the waters with all of that other stuff,
Right.
then you risk losing an independence vote when it goes on a ballot.
Yep. So you just want to, so keeping the referendum center in
Mhm.
focus, that's the main thing.
The
Gotcha.
one piece of advice I give every new independence movement that comes to us is your secret to longevity and ultimate success, as distilled down from all those lessons learned from all of those other movements, is you got to keep the main thing the main thing.
Yeah.
You get off track, you get distracted on these secondary issues, it's a recipe for failure.
Yeah. Discipline and focus. Yeah. Makes a lot of sense. So as the movement has gotten bigger, I'm sure you've like experienced some pushback in different ways. They maybe probably ways that you didn't even expect in the beginning. You have any like horror stories of things that have happened?
Yeah,
Being
but
thrown
I
in
will tell you,
court for no reason?
well, mainly pre 2005. When I
Really?
talk about the wilderness years, I mean, not only did we learn from these other movements around the world, but, we learned from a very public flame out of what could have been a legitimate movement in the mid to late 1990s, 96 and 97, with the Republic of Texas movement and what happened with McLaren. I mean, I literally watched that happen firsthand, the whole thing. Um, and it was a time after that where if you publicly espoused any viewpoint that you believe Texas should be an independent nation, regardless of whether you were connected with what happened out in Fort Davis with the standoff or any of those things, if you did, you suffered political persecution. People
Mm,
swear up and down that political persecution doesn't happen in the United States. I'm here to tell you firsthand. In reality, I saw it and I experienced it firsthand. Political persecution absolutely happens here. And we know that. Look, we've seen it recently. That's why when the Twitter files came out and you had government basically subcontracting out censorship to social
hmm.
media platforms, and what happened to some of the J6ers who were prosecuted, what happened to Ian up there in New Hampshire with the Bitcoin thing. I mean, just there's example after example after example that are just purely politically
Right.
motivated prosecutions. And I'm not saying all of them are, but I'm saying there are some that are clearly political persecution. And to say that it doesn't exist, we all know that it does, but that hand reaches very far back, where individuals were being threatened by Dan Morales when he was Attorney General, and literally fines from a judge that totaled quadrillion dollars, and employers getting visits from federal agents, and people subsequently lost their jobs. I was listed, Tommy, for a while. The Memorial Institute for the Prevention of Terrorism was set up as a response to the Oklahoma City bombing. It was supposed to be this data aggregation, and they, kind of a knowledge base. It was literally called the terrorism knowledge base. And I'm sitting in my office. I can't even remember what year it was, and did a search because we're always having to look for news, and I go pull it up back when the TKB was still rolling, and I do a search on the internet, and my name pops up, and there I am listed in the terrorism knowledge base. Now, I have never threatened anyone. I have never tried to incite violence. I despise violent rhetoric. I think loose tongues are the worst thing you can have in legitimate political movements. I'd
Mm,
never done anything like that. But here I
right.
was, my name listed in something called the terrorism knowledge base. And if I could find it, other people were looking at it that way as well,
Yeah.
So, um, but that being said, I think there's a clear delineation between what happened before 2005 and the foundation of the organization, and what happened after. We've been very clear from day one. This is a peaceful political process. We want a referendum. We're not trying to replace the government and pretend to be one. What we want to do is give the people of Texas a vote on whether or not they want to reclaim their right of self government. And it's constitutionally protected. Like I said, Article 1, Section 2 earlier guarantees us the right to make that decision. So we've been very careful. We've avoided a lot of that. Most of what has happened since 2005 has just been typical slimy political stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just curious about that because I remember when Ron Paul was running for office. I think it was the second time he ran for president in 2012. I remember hearing like mainstream conservative commentators saying that look out for people with Ron Paul stickers on the back of their cars because they could be domestic
Yeah.
terrorists. And I was just like,
Yeah.
this is the most absurd thing, especially now looking back. At the time, I wasn't very political at the time, but looking back now and then knowing, like, having met Daniel McAdams, having him on my show, knowing a bunch of people in this space, I'm like, why would you consider these people terrorists? Like, and it's just like a wrong, it's just they have wrong think, and that's it. And so I was just
Yeah.
curious if you noticed that type of stuff coming down.
Oh, 1,000%. I mean, when you have the federal government releasing, these signs of potential domestic terrorists, but they're lumping people like us in with, um, you know, uh, moms that go testify at the school, or go to the citizen comment portion of their school board meeting because they don't want their children converted into perverts,
Yeah.
or be subjected to perverts, or those people being considered domestic terrorists and people who believe in the Constitution. I say a lot of times we're in good company, except for the fact that they're also lumping us in with lone wolf and small cell terrorists like Al
Right.
Qaeda and ISIS and Hezbollah and all these and Hamas and people like that. And it's like, when Facebook did their little shenanigan a few years ago, which caused us to sue Meta, we had to file a lawsuit against Meta. They literally began blocking. If you went to type like people talk about this on the internet, they have a question or an objection about Texas independence, we have an FAQ for that, TEXIT.now.org, right? So our people will go over there, they'll grab a link and they'll go post it as an answer, a response to these people, and all of a sudden Facebook started blocking them. Then they started going back through, and anytime it had been mentioned on the platform. So it wasn't just like moving forward, they started retroactively doing it. And we know this because people were doing it in Facebook groups that we maintained. And so we, as administrators, we get notification a member has posted something inappropriate, we've removed it. They don't ever tell you specifically what it was, but we could see the pattern. And when you go look at the community standards that they say we violated, it was literally the same thing they used to take down pro-terrorist propaganda. So, Al Qaeda beheading videos and, ISIS beheading videos and glorification of suicide, they were using the exact same community standard. They were lumping us in with that sort of thing when we're completely different. We're a legitimate political organization, political movement. So, look, they left us absolutely no recourse but to sue them.
Yeah.
But we see that all the time, Tommy. I mean, they if people think that there is a separation between the mainstream media, the federal government, and the political establishment, it doesn't exist. It is one big machine. I'm not going to say that the messaging is coming from some central headquarters that say, hey, we have to say all the Texas people are, lunatic terrorists, or Ron Paul people are potential domestic terrorists, but they all sort of move that same direction.
Right. Well, yeah, and you have to be careful, and this is part of the reason I have like completely like I've pretty much removed myself from social media in general. Like I still have an X account, I still have a Facebook account, but I don't really use them hardly at all. And part of the reason I don't mess with them is
Yeah.
because I recognize that the beginning of social media was was motivated and funded largely by the CIA through QIntel. And what they were doing is they opened up this hedge fund that they were funneling money into, and this hedge fund was then financing all these tech companies. And some of these tech companies went on to become Twitter and Facebook, right? And or have ties within Twitter or Facebook, have close relations with them. So I just don't mess with them. I'm just like, yeah, I don't have any desire to be involved, and have my I mean, they can already all my stuff's up on YouTube. If they want to see what I'm doing, they can see what I'm doing. I have a Substack for everything. They can come look and see what my Substack is. I don't need to be on X and Facebook, which are cesspools as it is, and it just ruins my mood, and it just is no good for me anyway. So, but there's a lot of things like that that I pay attention to that I'm like, well, you're gonna have to wade through these waters in some way, shape, or form. Like when I renamed my podcast Year Zero, it's because I was looking through the Vault 7, the WikiLeaks Vault 7 stuff, and I was reading through that. And Year Zero was a CIA project in which they were um, hacking into the computer systems of newly manufactured vehicles and shutting them down and controlling them and driving them and learning how to take over the reins of a personal vehicle. And I was like, this is some crazy dystopian stuff that, would make a really great name for a podcast. So I'm stealing it, you know. So that's
Yeah,
where I went.
there you
So
go.
yeah, oh no, my point is you just got to be very careful where you involve yourself because there's all kinds of things being done, and this includes for somebody as public as y'all in the Texas Nationalist Movement.
Yeah, and it's, I would say this though, that we benefit from being very public, right? I mean, when you look at the percentage of support, right? The theory is that, okay, well, if you cut the head off the snake, then the snake dies. But this is Texas independence is not that. It's not this linear thing where you have, if Daniel Miller gets whacked, then all of this stuff goes away. I mean, we are at by every single measure, whether it's diffusion of innovation theory, whether it's tipping point theory, we are well past that point, right? And so
Right.
all we're doing now is we're managing the next steps of it. We're beyond all those things, right? I was asked at that Abbeville conference during the Q&A, what I thought, if I thought, when would this happen? How would it happen? Was it really going to happen in our lifetime? I said, look, you got to understand, Texas independence is no longer a hope, wish, or a dream. That's kind of, I think, where we were in 2005. And I said it's an inevitability, right? Either by design or by default. And I say by design or by default because by design is what you want. You want a structured, orderly progression toward self government and independence. By default is what happens with the United States as it continues to circle the toilet bowl headed for
Hmm.
its ultimate destination. Whether it is political polarization, whether it is unsustainable debt and monetary policy, or whether it's the cultural factors that are driving the divide and shattering this myth that there is an American nation. All of those factors continue to add up. The pressure continues to build, and there has been no release valve for that. Nobody's turned down the heat. In fact, they're doing quite the opposite and turning the heat up. The pendulum swings back and forth ever wider instead of winding down. So when that happens, what you will ultimately see is either a decline and dissolution, like what happened with the Soviet Union, or you will see balkanization, which is what no one wants.
Hmm.
And so ultimately, the best option for us, if we're being smart and we're thinking ahead, is to get ahead of this thing and have an exit by design, where we say, let's have an orderly exit while we're the eighth largest economy in the world. Let's put this in front of the voters. Let's have an orderly transition. Wish the remaining United States the best of luck while we go out there and secure a future of strength and prosperity and freedom for future generations right here in Texas.
In when I first started getting into politics and I was
Mm-hmm.
looking at the debt and just the influence that was having on the nation, I was really thinking that we were heading for a Soviet Union type of dissolution. But as the cultural like polarization has come into play and become like so mainstream in the political, frame, I really think there's a balkanization ahead of us and there's not anything we can do about it. I think that's just an inevitability. I do want to ask you one question because this is something that you'll hear people say that would be like, well, Texas can't secede because United States military bases are on Texas soil, and there are property of the United States government, weapons, uh, technologies, et cetera, that are stationed on Texas soil, and therefore it would cause a civil war. The U.S. and Texas would inevitably go to war against each other, and Texas would get stomped into the mud, and the U.S. would then be tyrannical over Texas. So, like, do you
Mm.
get these types of like questions, like feedback about,
Yes.
hey, what about the military bases? What about, NASA? What about this?
A thousand questions, right? And what I find, Tommy, is kind of interesting because many of the questions originate from a fundamental lack of knowledge of how things actually work,
Mm,
right? So, you know, people like for the longest time, for years, the most popular question that I got was, well, what happens to Social Security? And I mean, if I've answered that once, I've answered it a million times. It literally was the number one question for years and years and years. And just to break it down, to give you an idea of what I'm saying. So let's take a look at Social Security. People pay into Social Security. So the Social Security Administration, you go to their website, you look, what happens to Social Security recipients that live out of the United States? They keep getting their check. Don't move to Syria. Don't move to North Korea. Don't move to Cuba. Don't move to Iran. As long as you move to a place that's not designated a state sponsor of terror,
mm,
then you're going to continue to get your check. And we know this because a ton of Social Security recipients live in Mexico. They're expats. They go where they can live cheaply on the crumbs that the federal government gives in Social Security benefits.
right.
So people ask the question, what's going to happen to Social Security? And it's like, well, you still get it, right? That's not our policy. That's the federal government's policy. When the question they should be asking is, what are we going to do when the Social Security fund is virtually insolvent by 2031? Right?
Right.
What are we going to do when the federal government has squandered the last dime and everybody's got to take a 40 to 60% cut in the meager Social Security returns that they already get? Or so, you see that it's really gets down to a fundamental misunderstanding. Like, what are you going to do without the federal money? Well, we're going to be all right because we already overpay anywhere from 103 to 160 billion dollars annually into the federal system.
Hmm.
That's money that goes there that we never get it back in any shape, form, or fashion.
Right.
Not in grants, not in program services, not in payroll. It just evaporates, right? What are we going to do without all that federal money? You mean the money that they took from us and then gave us a 40% haircut and then sent it back to us with strings attached? Well, we're going to do just fine because now we're going to have every dime of that back in the Texas economy. Or they ask the question about the military bases, or they say that the military, would come in and stop us. Well,
Or the
that's a
debt.
fundamental misunderstanding. Yeah, okay. The federal debt's another one. By the way, I will never call it national debt because that's not debt that is owned by the individuals. That is the federal government is an entity. They have racked up that debt.
Yeah.
So number one, under international law and precedent, no independent state, what they would call succeeding as opposed to seceding, is responsible for the debt of the principal, right? So there is no obligation to pay back a single cent of it. Okay.
Hmm.
However, if negotiations broke a different way, in other words, we, as part of an overall negotiation for an exit, decided that, okay, we will be willing to shoulder some of this. The rule is that whatever calculation you use, whatever percentage of debt you take, you also get that much in assets, right? So that would be military assets. It could be military bases, but military bases are just federal reservations.
Hmm.
International law and precedent is also very clear on that, that at the moment that Texas officially becomes independent, anything that's on the soil belongs to us. And that was a lesson that the Canadian government understood during the Quebec referendum, because when it looked like they were going to win, they had an overnight flight of all military equipment out of Quebec into other provinces, or they were about to lose it. Now, that's not how it would have shaken down, but they weren't going to take any chances. So, there's like I said, I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding about the attitude of the military. If we were going to have a violent revolution, would the military absolutely come in? Sure, they would, and they would launch everything they had to suppress the rebellion. No,
Hmm.
go see Fort Sumter, right?
Right.
But that's why process matters so much, right? If the legislature passes TIRA, and that means we have a law in the books that says we're going to have a referendum, and it's conducted in a free, fair, and full election, and the results come back at 60% plus, which it's really first past the post. 50% plus one is always the threshold. But let's say that it comes back at 55 or 60 or 65%.
Hmm.
Well, it becomes recognized. It's a global event
Hmm.
because everybody's going to be looking at this thing. What becomes the pretext then for the federal government sending in the military to militarily suppress? What is the point where they can justify military intervention? Is it because they lost an election? Is that what it is? They don't have the moral high ground as long as we follow the process. Now, what comes after that? After that affirmative vote, constitutional issues, statutory issues, international covenants, treaties, and agreements, and negotiated issues. Those are the four things that we have to do after the affirmative vote. So it's not like after the vote comes in, we're independent the next day. There's work that has to be done to disentangle, and extract ourselves out from the federal system.
Yeah. Well, and I also, one of the things I always think of when they bring up the military bases, especially, is like, well, yeah, but look at Guantanamo Bay. Like,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, I mean, if we can rent like property to build a base on from an enemy, I'm sure Texas and the US could work something out, you know?
It'll happen. It's not like Texas is not going to have a military. If
Right.
Texas spent the same percentage on its GDP that is kind of the average, right? So above the 2% NATO floor, slightly south of the 4% that the United States spends. But if we're in that ballpark, Texas would have like the 11th most well-funded military on the entire planet, right? And
Right.
that's just for a nation of 30 million people. So, the most likely scenario that will come out, because we've watched this play out, would be a mutual defense pact between Texas and the United States,
Right.
where Texas would own the bases. They would be joint bases for the military compact, the self-defense pact. And it's not unlike the self-defense pact that the United States is part of with NATO, and
Yeah.
and I mean there's so many others around the world. So that's the most likely scenario to go down post independence.
That's right. Yeah, that's the way I was looking at it too. All right. I know we're hit about an hour, so I know you're a busy man. I don't want to keep you too long. How can people help the movement with getting the referendum on the ballot? What can we do from this point moving forward? What are the actions we need to start taking today?
Well, I mean, the most obvious thing is to go to tnm.me, that's tnm.me, and register support. Because, one of the things that we kind of hinted on, we talked about the suppression by big tech between the movement and our supporters is real, and it plays out across every one of those things. So the absolute best way for people to get plugged in is to go to tnm.me and register their support. Beyond that, what we're obviously working toward is the next legislative session. We still have runoffs that are happening right now. We've got a general election in November. We have our sponsors already lined out for the legislation in the next session. But all of our people, everyone who wants this to happen, needs to be interfacing with their state rep and state senator right now. And I mean, contact, even though we're still in the middle of an election, you got to treat these guys like they're going to go back to the legislative session. They have got to understand that this is an up or down vote for them. This is a voting issue. If you support this, I will support you, but if you do not, I will vote against you, even if you run against a head of cabbage in the next election. Right? They've got to know that it's serious business, and you'd be surprised at how little it takes per district to reach a tipping point in that district. But that's the key thing, right? For us moving into the next legislative session to have enough legislators on board that it becomes inevitable. And so that first step is obviously, like I said, people connecting with the organization at TNM.me, but also utilizing the tools that we have available. You know, as an alternative to having to be suppressed by big tech, we launched our own platform, our own mobile app, our own platform that is more than social media. It's an organizing platform, and it's called Texian, right? And people can go to Texian.app and they can sign in, they can download it, and that is the way that we definitely bypass the big tech censors that are out there. But it is the organizing platform. It allows our people to connect with people in their neck of the woods, their neighborhood, their city, their county, connect along like interest, plus help us to do the hard work of going out there and reaching the voters. Because at the end of the day, Tommy, we take a very long view of this. It's not just about getting the referendum. It's about winning the referendum. And you
Right.
don't win referendums unless you were doing the things before you get it that will help you win it when it gets on a ballot. So those are the actions. Look, super simple. Go to tnm.me, download the Texian app. Those are the two, and contact your state representative and state senator to let them know that you want to vote on Texas independence in the next session.
People are going to be thinking in quite an apathetic way when they start thinking about contacting politicians and the state senators, and just
Yeah.
a little encouragement to those people that think that way. Um, it's not like contacting a federal senator. It's not like contacting Washington D.C. You have much more influence over Austin than you do over the nation, over D.C. So don't be don't feel discouraged in getting in touch with your state senators and trying to push them in one way or another. They are still getting paid, they are still lobbied, but it's not near as difficult to move them into a direction you want them to move as it is in
Oh,
DC.
hey, the reality is all of these electeds, they all share the same number one fear, and that is a fear of being disliked to the point of not being reelected.
Mm-hmm.
That's their number one fear. And when you go look at the margins, I mean, when you realize that 80 to 90% of elections at the state level, whether it be state rep, state senator, any of the constitutional offices like comptroller, ag commissioner, lieutenant governor, governor, all of those, if you go look at the margins that those are decided in, the real races are run in the primaries, particularly for state reps and state senators. Those are and if you look at the margins on a lot of those, what you're going to find is that so many of them are vulnerable, right? All you have to do is sway maybe 1,000 voters in some districts, and that may seem monumental for people. How can one person do that? Well, we just talked about it, earlier, which is why I say that we believe in high visibility.
Right.
Being visible, being vocal, showing up, being unafraid, unashamed, unabashed becomes encouragement to those people that are perhaps maybe timid, that
Mm-hmm.
say, this may be futile, but that's what this guy's doing. And if he's going to do it for me, then who am I to sit back and do nothing? Right?
Right.
It may be those people that are quiet and just been afraid to poke their head up that see us as a leadership example when we're out there being vocal toward our state reps and our state senators or our county commissioners courts or whatever. That is the thing. I just tell everybody, look, all of you are leaders. Just set the leadership example. Do what you know is right and go do it and be visible, visibly do it. So you can encourage those who may not have or may not currently possess the courage that you have.
That's right. Okay, so you have some books coming out. You already have one book out, right? You want to plug
Yeah,
that?
yeah, yeah, two. One is out of print. For
Oh, okay.
2011, I wrote Line in the Sand, but the Texit book, which is back over here,
Hmm.
that one was released, and it really deals with sort of the process, helping people understand why Texit is a thing and how to think about the issue. And it really kind of helps reframe the questions. But I got two books that are dropping this year. The next one is going to be, it's called The Tethered Sovereign. It's a deconstruction of the Supreme Court case of Texas versus White, which is, the one that people love to say says that states can't leave the Union. That's not true, but that's what they love to say. But it's a complete deconstruction of the Texas versus White
Mm.
case. Additionally, the one that has become my secret book that's coming out probably toward the tail end of the year is called Crossing the Line, and it's a 30+ year retrospective on the Texas independence movement here in Texas, and it gets into some nitty gritty information that's never been published anywhere. Will be in that book. Stories like the
Nice.
Dewhurst story, stories about what happened back in the 1990s. So I'm kind of looking forward to that. I almost wish that I'd have got that one finished before I did the Tethered Sovereign, but God has His plans.
Yes, he does. And y'all have a YouTube channel, don't you? You still do podcasts over there?
We do. The new podcast we retooled the Texas News podcast. It's going to be coming out again this year, rebranded as the Texas First Podcast. And then, of course, every Thursday night at 8 p.m., I do a live stream Q&A, and I encourage people to jump on the Texian app or jump on YouTube or even on those other platforms that I won't mention where we live stream to all of them. And literally, it's just an hour of me answering questions that people have about Texas independence, about the T&M, about Texas politics, global events, whatever it is. Everything that is talked about on that particular live stream is listener submitted. They email them or they ask live, and I mean, I get to be one of the most transparent people in Texas politics. I
There you
don't
go.
know that Greg Abbott or Dan Patrick have ever subjected themselves to a weekly Q&A from their constituents ever.
No, I seriously doubt it, and I don't think they would last very long either if they did.
No.
So, all
No.
right. Well, you got anything else you want to get out there before we get off here?
I mean, Tommy, did I not soapbox enough for you? I mean, I really should get off of my apple crate and shut up, right?
I could listen to you all day, man. I ain't gonna lie, but I know you're a busy man. You got things to do.
Well, look, I think we know where we can find one another, and if you ever want to do this again, I'm obviously game. So,
Absolutely, Daniel. I appreciate you. I'm gonna stop the recording and we'll get disconnected.